I'm on 2K24 and we are going to see what Caitlin Clark's career would look like if she played in the NBA. To do this, I took a look at the most downloaded WNBA draft classes to see what her rating should look like. Most versions of their draft class have her joining the league at an 83 overall, which I think is more than fair for the WNBA, but not for the NBA, so we'll have to fix that. I then created a male version of her and entered her into the most popular 2024 NBA draft class. After looking through and altering just about all of her stats, I ended up landing on 79 overall, which makes her the highest rated player in her class. But hold on, fellas, don't suck the Cheeto crumbs off your fingers yet. To be fair, this draft class appears to be one of the worst in a long time. On top of that, Caitlin is 22 years old compared to everyone else being around 19 years old, and I kept it realistic when it comes to how her physical traits would carry over into the NBA. She has some of the worst defensive traits in the league. She is an inch shorter and at least 10 pounds lighter than Trae Young for reference. So her interior defense is 3 above the minimum. I don't expect her to ever block a shot, and I gave her a generous strength rating of 38. Her overall potential is an 88 with a 74 minimum and 92 maximum. So best case scenario, she's hoping to look like a Clippers Chris Paul. Also, I made sure to keep her tendencies in check. Most importantly, I gave her the common sense to stay away from the rim and to hit the open man as much as possible. It's time to get her career started, so I headed into my league. I set it to start from today, and I will take control of all teams, but the simulation will be set to run without me doing anything. Here's how the draft lottery went. At number 5, we have the Pistons, so Caitlin can breathe a sigh of relief. Number 4 is predicted to be the Spurs, but it goes to the Bulls. With Lonzo only having about 3% of his knees remaining, that could have been a good rebuild route for her. At number 3, we have the Trailblazers, who would probably pass on her anyway. And it is down to the Spurs and Raptors. Both teams are a good fit for her, but the number 1 pick will go to none other than the San Antonio Spurs. And with the number 1 pick, the Spurs will select Caitlin Clark, which is the perfect fit for both parties. Her lack of defensive ability can be covered up by Wembanyama's talents. She's a willing passer, unlike some of the divas on that Spurs team right now. And as far as I know, ever since Primo left, no one there is going to try to sleep with her or beat her. When it came to the start of the regular season for the Spurs, Caitlin was not to be found in the starting lineup thanks to the transphobic bigot, Trey Jones. I watched her first game from start to finish to see her first official points, but it took a while. With 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, she took a very awkward step back jumper in the paint over 2 defenders, and that's a clip you'd be seeing nonstop whether you like it or not. I simulated to the All-Star break, and surprisingly, the Spurs are in playoff contention with a 28-27 record. And at this point, Caitlin has started 32 of her 55 games and is averaging 14 points and 5.5 assists per game. Sadly for Caitlin, she did not win Rookie of the Year. That went to Ron Holland of the Chicago Bulls. However, she did make first team All-Rookie. The Spurs finished 10th in the West, but they won both of their play-in games after they piggybacked off their bigs. However, after that, they had to meet the OKC Thunder in the first round, which meant Caitlin had to guard SGA for an entire series. The Thunder won the first 3 of 4 games, and the Spurs were looking to avoid elimination in a close Game 5. With the shot clock off, the Thunder were down 3, but Josh Giddey hit the tying 3. With no timeouts remaining, the Spurs had to go, and Caitlin Clark did what no Spur has thought of before. She gave the ball to Wemby, and they took the lead with little over a second remaining. But out of the timeout, the Thunder find SGA at half court, and he hits the game-winning three-pointer in Caitlin's face. That was one of the all-time lows for women in general, but the Spurs are not done rebuilding. In the next draft, they own Charlotte's pick, and it goes from 7th to 3rd, and they come out of the 2025 draft with Dylan Harper and Drake Powell. After one season, Caitlin has already progressed to an 83 overall, which might be a bit much. And on top of that, Wemby is a 96 overall at 21 years old. And I guess the Spurs are going to go all in this season because they traded Malachi Branham and a 2nd round pick for Paul George, who at this point is a regressing 85 overall, who is still owed $170 million over the next 3 years. But it might have paid off already because after Wemby's first MVP season, the Spurs finished in 2nd place in the West, only 3 games behind the Thunder. Caitlin's scoring numbers didn't move much. She averaged 16.6 points per game, but 7.7 assists per game is pretty solid, but also not that hard when you have a rim-running ostrich who is always open. In the first round, the Spurs went to a Game 7 with the Rockets, but young Caitlin has the system figured out. In the tough moments, just give Wemby the ball and stay out of his way. In the second round, they met the Timberwolves. The Spurs were looking to have them out of here in 5, and Caitlin was doing her part. She found Wemby near the basket in back-to-back clutch situations, but once again, the Spurs were beaten at the buzzer by a half-court three-pointer. That definitely complicated things for the Spurs, but they were still able to move on after a close Game 7 win. And in the conference finals, the Spurs will face the Thunder. This year, the Thunder made it easier for Caitlin by matching her up with Cason Wallace and breaking Chet's left arm. But still, the Thunder went up 3-1 in the series before blowing them out in Oklahoma and then going on to win the finals. In year 3, Caitlin will now be 24, turning 25, and all the way up to an 88 overall. Yet she still didn't come close to being an all-star this year. And the Spurs made another big and questionable trade this season. They traded Devin Vassell for Tobias Harris. They finished second in the West again behind the Nuggets, while Caitlin averaged career highs in points and assists. The Spurs matched up with the Pelicans in the first round and took them out in 5 games. In the next round, they still faced the obstacle of getting past the Thunder. The Spurs went up 3-2, but lost in overtime in Game 6. Game 7 was also close, but Tobias Harris decided to peak as a human being. Caitlin also made some great passes and decisions in the final minutes, and finally, the Spurs have gotten past the Thunder in year 3. The Spurs were matched up with the Timberwolves in the conference finals. They went down 3-1, but every time I simcasted, the Spurs couldn't come close to losing. So they will be moving on to the finals to meet the Pistons. I moved Caitlin to shooting guard for this series so she didn't have to guard Cade, and the Spurs went up 3-0. The Pistons won Game 4 in the simcast to avoid the sweep, and in Game 5, the Spurs were down 6 with 3 minutes left. But for once, Caitlin Clark did something other than just pass the ball around and get scored on. She hit some moves and hit a three-pointer right over Cade Cunningham, and Caitlin hit 2 more clutch threes that ended up giving the Spurs the lead with 37 seconds left to go. The Pistons went back up too, but Caitlin is in her prime in this game. She delivered a perfect alley-oop to Wemby, which put them up 1. But old habits die hard. Caitlin has yet another three-pointer put up in her face, and the Pistons go up 2. But when in doubt, give it to Wemby and clear out. Wemby gets the putback at the buzzer, and the Spurs go into overtime with a lot of momentum. And in overtime, Wemby took over. He gave them an early lead. Caitlin sealed it up with free throws, and the Spurs have won the 2027 NBA Finals. The one game they switched Caitlin back to point guard, Cade dropped 54 points on her, but it doesn't matter when Wemby puts up 47 in 18. Caitlin and the Spurs are still entering their prime following a championship, but the 2028 season was not a smooth ride for them. The best part of this season is that Wemby re-signed for 5 more years. Paul George's contract was about to expire, but they decided to trade him for another bad contract player that won't start. They made the playoffs as a 2 seed, but with 4 games left in this season, Caitlin broke her leg, and the Spurs were eliminated by the Rockets in the second round. After this season, Caitlin re-signed with the Spurs on a 5-year deal, which of course only paid her 3/4 of the going wage, just in case she gets pregnant and decides to keep it, rather than shoot it from deep like she usually does. She reached 90 overall at the beginning of the season, but at this point, Dylan Harper passed her as the second best player on the team. And as stacked as this team is, they had no issue making it to the NBA Finals for the second time in this new era. But they ran into the Cooper Flag-led Bulls, who took them out in 6 and left my little ball of sunshine crying in the shower. In year 7, Dylan Harper signed a max contract himself and then went on to win his first MVP, which makes me wonder what's wrong with Wemby, but apparently he's healthy and the Spurs finished with a league high in wins with 63. Except they ran into the Thunder again in the first round. The Thunder took a 3-1 series lead. The Spurs forced their way to a Game 7. Game 7 was a down-to-the-wire contest, but I quickly noticed that Shea was cooking Dylan Harper over and over. Still, the Spurs were lucky enough to have a shot at forcing overtime, but Dylan Harper took a half-court shot instead of giving it to the best woman shooter of all time. Dylan missed that heave, ruined a perfectly good year for the Spurs, and will no longer be invited to the human sacrifice parties. With seasons like that, Wemby and Caitlin are already starting to deplete in overall, but this team is still stacked as can be. They finished in first place in the West with 60 wins, ran through the Western Conference playoffs, and once again destroyed Anthony Edwards' hopes and dreams in the process. For the first time yet, they ran into the Charlotte Hornets in the finals, who apparently have been rigging drafts considering they still have LaMelo, yet somehow managed to still draft Ace Bailey and AJ Dibansa. This series went to a Game 7 in Charlotte, but in crunch time, Caitlin delivered such a great assist that she mentally broke the Hornets. The Spurs were feeling so good about this victory that even Caitlin got to take and make a post shot. The Spurs ended up cruising their way to a second championship in this era. And oh yeah, the Spurs made a diversity hire in the offseason at their head coaching position and got themselves an absolute unit of a ladyboy. Year 9 was statistically the best season for Caitlin Clark in her career. I didn't even notice it at first, but she was given her first regular season award since her rookie year and was honored with third team All-NBA. She even averaged over 20 points for the first time in her career, but it turns out the only reason all of that happened is because Dylan Harper has been out for most of the season with injuries. And with the team's number 2 man out, the 1 seed Spurs lost in 7 games in the first round. In the following year, Wemby was given his second MVP award, but again in the postseason, the Spurs were dealing with a bunch of injuries and were once again taken out by a team of woman beaters by technicality, the OKC Thunder. After 2 disappointing seasons in a row, the Spurs finally had their big 3 together in 2034. Yeah, the team has a few broken legs per usual, but those guys were not necessary. After a close call with the Grizzlies in the first round, everything went according to plan. Wemby felt like shooting the ball again and was averaging 30 points a game in the postseason. The Jazz beat the Thunder for the Spurs, and then the Spurs proceeded to roll through the Jazz. And once again, they matched up with the Pistons in the finals. With Caitlin at point guard and matched up with Cade, they went down 2-1, but after a quick switch of positions, the Spurs took a 3-2 series lead. In Game 6, Dylan Harper again proves that he hates Caitlin Clark. They needed a 3-pointer for a tie, so he looked right past her and let the power forward throw up a brick. But maybe they just didn't want to celebrate a championship in Detroit, and for that, I can't blame them. They blew out the Pistons in Game 7, and this squad won their 3rd championship. In 2035, Caitlin dislocated her right patella with 3 games left in the season, and that wasn't Caitlin's best idea. The Spurs were once again taken out by an 8 seed in the first round. In 2036, the Spurs never really faced a challenge. SGA retired, so the Thunder no longer had their number. Luka was making one last playoff push and met the Spurs in the conference finals, but Caitlin sent that man into retirement with no hardware and no bitches. And in the finals, they met the Bucks, whose only player I recognize at this point is Dariq Whitehead. I don't know what's going on with the East anymore, but that was a cakewalk. The Spurs won their 4th ring in this era after a 4-game sweep. In 2037, this dynasty is finally starting to show rust. The team's overalls aren't down much, but they finished with an all-time low 5th seed in the West, which led to them seeing a 2nd round exit thanks to the Rockets. And to make things even worse, in the offseason, Caitlin went down 2 overalls, and every player on this screen is now 30 years or older. But this Spurs team had one last ride left in the tank. They finished 2nd in the West, won back-to-back Game 7 series against the Suns and Rockets. In the conference finals, Dylan Harper actually showed up instead of just putting women down as a gender on national television. And in the finals, they met the Raptors, who somehow still have Scotty Barnes. But in this battle of disabilities, the Spurs came out on top. Caitlin and the Spurs won their 5th championship in 5 games. And at 36 years old, Caitlin averaged 25 and 10 for the series. But in the offseason, she fell to an 84 overall. The Spurs still had a beautiful roster and even signed an 85 overall power forward, which led to them leading the West with 65 wins, just to find out that Wemby broke a leg and Drake Powell fractured a leg right before the postseason. If Caitlin could somehow carry this team to another championship, she might make herself a GOAT case, but no. The Spurs were eliminated in the 2nd round in 6 games by the Suns, and that'll be the last time Caitlin will ever see the court in her career. She only played 15 seasons, but she retired at the age of 37 with an interesting resume. She helped make the Spurs a dynasty again, winning 5 championships in an 11-year span, but individually, she peaked at 3rd team All-NBA, which I think is actually pretty realistic. She did not make the Hall of Fame, but she did get her jersey retired. I watched the remaining years of Vic and Dylan's career play out. They never made the finals again without Caitlin, but of course they did both make the Hall of Fame. So it turns out Caitlin ended up being a glue gal, hard-working, good locker room presence like every other white guy in the league. But I think this was a pretty successful and realistic simulation for Caitlin. I honestly do believe she could at least be a solid role player in the NBA. I don't think she'd work on every team, but the Spurs would be her safest bet. Her shooting and passing skills could easily transfer over to the men's game. Her defense would definitely be an issue, but that's just the case for any 6-footer in the NBA. For a woman that's going to create a new ceiling in women's basketball, I don't think it's too crazy to believe she could at least have an NBA career somewhere in between the likes of Steve Blake to Andre Miller, if given the right opportunities. But let me know what you think. If you hate this woman, this concept, and possibly the color of her skin, let it be known in the comment section and see how that works out for you. But thanks for watching. I love you guys, and I will see you in the next one.